So, for this stop motion tutorial, we're going to try out a few different methods to make an object transform or grow, all using clay. We will use one method to make the stem of this flower shoot up, a second method to make the flower head and petals appear, and a third method to make the little green shoots grow. All we need is 3 different colors of clay, some clay sculpting tools, and 2 beads with holes in them if you want to add eyes. To grow the stem, we will start with this piece of green clay, and we're going to utilize an animation principle called squash and stretch, where an object squashes down to a compacted shape and then elongates or stretches into another shape. When a ball bounces, it changes its shape just a little when it hits the ground. Used in animation, we can exaggerate this change to inform the viewer about what material the object is made of, or to give flexibility and energy to the action. So, rather than animating this stem to grow straight up, we will add some anticipation and energy by making it squash down first. We want to ease in to the squash, so our beginning frames will show very little movement. But then, with increasingly larger changes between frames, we will aim towards the squashed shape. It's important in squash and stretch that the piece of clay maintains the same volume the whole time, so we will not add or remove any clay when we're doing squash and stretch. As the clay reaches the limit of how far we want it to stretch, we may ease out the movement by making increasingly smaller changes again. It's sort of like we are pulling back a rubber band, hesitating for a split second before letting it shoot forward. As the stem transitions from squash to stretch, we can save ourselves a little bit of time by reusing the last few frames we already shot. We can copy the frames and reverse them. See how that works? And now let's sculpt the clay forward and aim for the tall shape. The spacing in the next few frames will be large, meaning the changes will be large between each frame shot. This way, the movement appears to be fast, like the stem is springing up. This quick change between squash and stretch is part of what gives the animation energy. Now, for this example, we added a little orange flower bud. It's an optional touch we won't focus on here. The flower stem showed a lot of energy as it reached up, but we need to give it a few frames to ease out of that movement and fall back into place. Let's just forward through the next few frames. Notice how the stem settles back into a solid resting position. Now, the effect of the flower bud growing and the petals popping out is achieved through a different method of transformation. Rather than resculpting the same piece of clay over and over, we will create a series of replacement pieces. Each piece will represent a different stage of the flower bud and petal growth. So we need to create some shapes, both at the tiny end of growth and also at the largest and final size. We will also make a few in-between shapes. For the yellow petals, we can reuse the shapes representing the growth stages, but we will need a full-size version of the petal for everyone. The process we use here will be one of simple substitution. We go frame by frame from the smallest bud to the largest. Try to think about where the growth is coming from and line up the shapes so they are centered on that spot. It will make the growth look more even. For the petals, we're just going to start by making a small indent before the first tiny yellow piece emerges. As with the bud, we will start small and get bigger. We will repeat the process for each petal. Make an indent, and then reuse the same small pieces from the first petal. You can change the shape as well as the size of a replacement piece. Just make sure to center the growth at the same spot and check that each shape flows smoothly from one to the next. Okay, we are ready to make the little green shoots grow. This final method of transformation is pretty straightforward. For the first few frames, we will just barely mark the surface of the clay where we want the shoots to push out. This tiny movement creates a little bit of anticipation. Then we will simply add clay and sculpt as we go. The outcome of this method is a little harder to control, but there are a few things we can keep in mind to make the animation successful. We can have a path in mind when we begin and try to stick to it. Most stop-motion apps have an onion skin tool, which allows you to see through one frame to the frames that are previous to it. It's also helpful to replay previous frames to make sure that each frame is flowing nicely from one to the next, and to make sure that when we add additional clay, what we already built doesn't get knocked out of place. We could also control the amount of clay and change we make between frames. If we consistently add the same amount of clay for each frame, the shoots will appear to be growing at an even rate. Or if we want the growth to speed up or slow down, we can add increasingly larger or increasingly smaller amounts of clay. For the last few frames, let's just make the little green shoot curl in a little bit to finish off the motion. We will use the same process of carefully adding clay as we go for the other side. All right, our cute little flower is almost done, but we have one last replacement piece we haven't used. There. That feels a bit more finished. But how can we take this a step further? Why don't we use the animation skills and principles we've learned to give the flower a bit of personality? What else can we make grow and transform?